Engineers called their B-29 bomber a failure until it sank 18 German ships in one day. They called it a failure. That's what the engineers whispered in the hallowed halls of Boeing, what the test pilots muttered under their breath after another emergency landing, and what the ground crews cursed as they wrestled with its temperamental engines. The B-29 Superfortress, a behemoth of aluminum and ambition, was supposed to be the ultimate weapon, a bomber capable of striking deep into enemy territory with unprecedented range and payload. Instead, it was a money pit, a maintenance nightmare, and a source of endless frustration. But then, there was that one day. A single, brutal day in the unforgiving theater of war, when this so-called failure achieved something utterly astonishing, something that rewrote its legacy and etched its name into the annals of history. It sank 18 German ships. 18. In one day. A feat that, even now, decades later, still sends shivers down my spine just thinking about the audacity, the sheer, improbable success of it all. Let me take you back, not to the sun-drenched islands of the Pacific where the B-29 would later become a legend, but to a different, grayer front. A front where the very idea of a superfortress operating seemed almost absurd, yet where its unique capabilities would be put to an unimaginable test. The year was 1944. The war in Europe was grinding on, a relentless meat grinder of attrition and strategic maneuvering. The Allies were pushing, slowly but surely, towards the heart of the Third Reich, but the fight for control of the seas, particularly the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic and the coastal shipping lanes, remained absolutely critical. German U-boats, despite heavy losses, were still a deadly menace, and their surface fleet, though diminished, still posed a threat, especially when protecting vital coastal convoys supplying their armies and industrial centers. The B-29, as it was conceived, was a marvel of aviation engineering. Its design was revolutionary, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible for a bomber. It featured a pressurized cabin, allowing crews to operate at altitudes previously unbearable, reducing fatigue on long missions. Its remote-controlled gun turrets, operated by a complex central fire control system, offered unparalleled defensive firepower. And then, there were those engines. Four monstrous Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone radials, each churning out over 2,200 horsepower. On paper, it was a dream. In reality, it was a beast. The early days of the B-29 program were plagued by problems. Serious, life-threatening problems. The most notorious issue was the constant overheating of those powerful R-3350 engines. They were prone to catching fire, often mid-flight, turning the mighty superfortress into a flaming coffin. Crews trained on the B-29 lived with a constant dread, knowing that any mission could end in a fiery plunge. Maintenance crews worked around the clock, battling a seemingly endless array of mechanical gremlins, from hydraulic leaks to electrical failures. The aircraft was so complex, so advanced for its time, that simply keeping it airworthy was a monumental challenge. Resources were poured into fixing these issues, millions upon millions of dollars, time that was desperately short in a global conflict. Doubts festered. Was this truly the future of air power, or simply an expensive, dangerous folly? Many believed it was the latter. Despite its troubles, the strategic minds within the Allied command knew the potential of the B-29. Its range and payload capacity were unmatched. If its flaws could be overcome, it could revolutionize aerial warfare. While the primary focus for its deployment was always envisioned for the vast distances of the Pacific theater, targeting the Japanese home islands, there were always discussions, always contingency plans, for its potential use elsewhere. The need for a heavy, long-range bomber that could deliver a devastating punch was universal, and the European theater, with its complex logistical challenges and heavily defended targets, presented its own unique set of requirements. It was against this backdrop of skepticism and desperate hope that a highly unusual deployment began to take shape. Not a full-scale transfer of B-29 groups, but a specialized, almost experimental detachment. The details surrounding this particular operation were shrouded in secrecy, even at the time. The strategic rationale was clear. The Germans were desperately trying to maintain their supply lines, moving war materials, troops, and even valuable resources like ball bearings and synthetic fuel components along their coastlines and through the Baltic Sea. These convoys, often heavily escorted, were difficult targets for conventional bombers, and even more so for naval assets operating in contested waters. Allied intelligence had identified a critical vulnerability, a series of heavily trafficked routes that, if disrupted effectively, could cripple key segments of the German war machine. Our mission, as I understood it from the hushed briefings, was unlike anything the B-29 had been designed for. We weren't flying against sprawling industrial complexes deep inland, nor were we targeting distant island strongholds. Instead, we were tasked with something far more precise, far more dynamic: anti-shipping operations. This wasn't just about dropping bombs. It was about hunting. It was about flying relatively low, enduring heavy flak, and engaging targets that were actively trying to evade and defend themselves. The superfortress, with its immense bomb bay capacity, could carry a staggering number of bombs, including specialized anti-ship ordnance. But its sheer size and relatively slower speed at lower altitudes made it a tempting target for enemy fighters and ground-based anti-aircraft guns. The risks were astronomical. The crews assigned to this detachment were a breed apart. They were volunteers, men who understood the dangers of the B-29 and the even greater perils of this specific mission. They were hardened veterans, many of whom had already flown countless perilous missions over Germany in B-17s and B-24s, or they were young, eager pilots and bombardiers who saw this as their chance to make a real difference. Morale was a strange mix of grim determination and an almost fatalistic acceptance of the odds. We knew we were flying a temperamental beast into a hornet's nest. Each pre-flight check was meticulous, each engine run-up accompanied by a silent prayer. We learned to listen for the subtle nuances of the engines, the telltale coughs, the slight fluctuations in RPM that could signal impending disaster. We honed our navigation skills, practicing low-level approaches over simulated coastlines, perfecting our bomb runs against mock targets. The planning for this specific day, the day that would redefine the B-29's reputation, was exhaustive. Intelligence gathered from reconnaissance flights, intercepted communications, and resistance networks painted a detailed picture of German shipping movements. We knew the routes, the estimated timings, the typical escort compositions. Our targets were varied: merchant ships laden with vital supplies, troop transports, and even smaller naval vessels that provided escort. The objective was not just to sink ships, but to sow chaos, to disrupt the enemy's logistics so severely that it would feel the impact on the front lines. The weather forecast for that day was a critical factor. A narrow window of opportunity was predicted, with sufficient cloud cover for initial approach and egress, but clear enough over the target areas for accurate bombing. It was a gamble, but in war, sometimes gambles were all you had. Our chosen base of operations for this particular mission was a forward airfield, hastily prepared, in a remote part of Allied-held territory, far from the prying eyes of enemy intelligence. The secrecy was paramount. We couldn't afford for the Germans to know that B-29s were operating in their backyard, let alone targeting their shipping. The sight of these massive bombers, normally associated with the distant Pacific, would have sent shockwaves through their command. Each aircraft was carefully prepared, loaded with a precise mix of high-explosive bombs, some equipped with delayed fuses for maximum damage, others with instantaneous fuses for direct hits. The sheer weight of the ordnance was staggering, a testament to the B-29's colossal carrying capacity. The night before the mission was tense. The air in the briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken anxieties. Maps covered the walls, crisscrossed with red and blue lines, marking our routes, known flak zones, and projected enemy patrol areas. The mission commander, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too much, stood before us, his voice calm but firm. He laid out the plan, detailing every phase: takeoff, rendezvous points, the long transit over hostile waters, the precise timing of our approach to the target areas, and the critical escape routes. He emphasized the importance of maintaining formation, of supporting each other, and of absolute adherence to the mission parameters. He didn't mince words about the risks. He told us that this mission was vital, that it could turn the tide in certain sectors, and that every man on every crew was essential. We were flying into a hornet's nest, he reiterated, but we were flying the superfortress, and for all its flaws, it was a formidable weapon in capable hands. As dawn approached, the airfield was a hive of activity. Ground crews made final adjustments, fuel trucks topped off tanks, and armorers checked bomb bay doors. The roar of the R-3350 engines starting up one by one was deafening, a symphony of raw power that vibrated through the very ground beneath our feet. The smell of aviation fuel and exhaust hung heavy in the cold morning air. Each crew climbed into their assigned aircraft, performing their individual checks, the familiar routines of small comfort amidst the immense pressure. I remember the feeling of strapping into my seat, the weight of the flight suit, the cold metal of the controls. The pre-flight chatter over the intercom was clipped, professional, a way to stave off the gnawing fear. We looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement of the dangers ahead, a shared understanding of the task at hand. This was it. The moment of truth for the B-29 and for us. We taxied out onto the runway, one by one, massive silhouettes against the pre-dawn sky. The sheer size of these aircraft, each one a flying fortress, was awe-inspiring. As my pilot throttled up, the engine screamed to full power, shaking the entire aircraft. The B-29 lumbered down the runway, gathering speed with agonizing slowness, the weight of its bombs and fuel making it feel impossibly heavy. Then, with a shudder, we lifted off, climbing slowly into the low clouds, leaving behind the relative safety of the airfield. Our formation tightened once we were airborne, a squadron of these magnificent, yet temperamental, machines heading east. The journey was long, the constant drone of the engines a hypnotic rhythm. We navigated by dead reckoning and celestial observation, occasionally making contact with ground stations for updated weather reports and intelligence. The hours crawled by, each one bringing us closer to the enemy coast, closer to the unknown. The first sign of enemy territory was the distinct chatter on the radio, German voices, the distant crackle of static, and the sudden tension in the cockpit. We were approaching the designated patrol zones, areas known to be heavily defended by coastal anti-aircraft batteries, and regularly patrolled by Luftwaffe fighters. Our mission required us to drop below our preferred high-altitude cruising speed, descending to an altitude that would allow for accurate visual targeting of the ships. This was the most dangerous part of the approach. We were trading the relative safety of altitude for the precision needed to accomplish our mission. The clouds, which had been our allies, protecting us from early detection, began to thin as we neared the coastline, revealing glimpses of the choppy gray sea below. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high! Multiple contacts!" It was the tail gunner, his voice tight with urgency. German fighters. They had found us. The B-29, for all its defensive armament, was not designed for dogfights. Our strategy was to maintain tight formation, allowing our combined firepower to create a deadly wall of lead for any attacking aircraft. But these were German pilots, skilled and aggressive, flying nimble FW-190s, and Bf-109s. The sky around us became a maelstrom of tracers, cannon fire, and the terrifying shriek of diving fighters. Our remote-controlled turrets swiveled, spitting fire, their synchronized streams of bullets tearing through the air. The aircraft shuddered from near misses, the distinct thud of incoming rounds echoing through the cabin. We were under attack, and the mission hadn't even truly begun. We pressed on, a relentless, unyielding spearhead aimed directly at the enemy's vital shipping lanes, knowing that every single crew member was fighting for their lives, and for the success of this audacious, desperate mission. The clock was ticking, and below us, somewhere in the murky waters, German ships were sailing, oblivious to the storm that was about to descend upon them, delivered by the very bomber that engineers had once dismissed as a failure. The world outside my window dissolved into a terrifying ballet of metal and fire. Tracers, red and green, lanced through the air, carving deathly paths around our formation. The roar of our own engines was punctuated by the staccato drumming of machine gun fire from our turrets, and the sickening thud of enemy cannon shells impacting nearby. My pilot, Captain Miller, was wrestling the controls, his face a mask of grim concentration, trying to hold our lumbering behemoth steady while simultaneously attempting evasive maneuvers. The sheer size of the B-29 made us a challenging target, but also a slow and ponderous one. An FW-190, a blur of gray and black, flashed past my side window, so close I could almost see the pilot sneer. Then, our upper forward turret opened up, a stream of .50 caliber rounds stitching a line across its wing, sending sparks flying before it banked sharply and disappeared. "Damage report!" Miller barked over the intercom, his voice tight. "Left inner engine is showing a temperature spike, Cap! Holding steady for now, but it's climbing," came the strained reply from the flight engineer, Sergeant Davies. The dreaded R-3350s, always a ticking time bomb. This was exactly what we feared. The stress of combat, the lower altitude, the constant power changes, it was a recipe for disaster. "Tail gunner reports one FW-190 peeling off, trailing smoke. Another inbound at 7 o'clock low." The voice of Corporal Jenkins, our tail gunner, was breathless but resolute. The German pilots were relentless, pressing their attacks with a ferocity that spoke of desperation. We were far from home, deep in their territory, and they knew it. They wanted to stop us before we could even reach the coast. Our formation, though still largely intact, was no longer the tight, disciplined spearhead we begun with. The attacks had forced individual aircraft to weave and jink, creating gaps that the enemy fighters exploited with chilling efficiency. I saw the flash of explosions in the distance, a B-29 from the lead squadron taking a direct hit to its wing, a blossoming inferno that momentarily lit up the gray sky before it began a slow, agonizing spiral downwards. No shoots. My gut clenched. These were the stakes. This was the reality of the mission. "Maintain course. Keep firing," Miller commanded, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, cutting through the fear. "We're almost there." The fight continued for what felt like an eternity, a brutal, unforgiving dance of predator and prey. Our gunners were magnificent, their remote-controlled turrets tracking with deadly precision, often forcing the German fighters to break off their attacks. But we weren't unscathed. The B-29 groaned and shuddered, a testament to its robust construction, but the impacts were taking their toll. A sudden jolt sent shivers through the airframe, followed by the acrid smell of ozone and burning insulation. "Electrical hit! Navigation systems flickering!" shouted Lieutenant Peterson, our navigator, from his station. "Lost primary compass for a sec. Re-establishing." The chaos was absolute, a maelstrom of noise and violence, yet through it all, the B-29, the supposed failure, held together. It was a testament not just to its engineering, but to the sheer will of the men flying it, coaxing it, fighting with it and in it. Slowly, painstakingly, the enemy fighters began to disengage, their fuel and ammunition dwindling, or perhaps having achieved their objective of harassing us and inflicting losses. The sky, though still hazy with exhaust and the lingering smell of cordite, started to clear. The immediate threat had receded, but the cost was evident. One less B-29 in our formation, a chilling reminder of the perils we faced. Below us, the choppy waters of the North Sea stretched out, gray and unforgiving. And then, through a break in the lingering clouds, I saw them. A dark smudge on the horizon, slowly resolving into multiple shapes. Ships. Not just one or two, but a convoy, a collection of vessels guarded by smaller, faster warships. They looked small from our altitude, yet menacing, their decks bristling with anti-aircraft guns. Target identified. Multiple vessels, heavy escort. I called out, my voice hoarse, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Prepare for attack run. The descent was controlled but rapid, our giant aircraft dropping from the relative safety of higher altitude into the teeth of the enemy's defenses. The air grew thicker, the visibility sharpening, painting the scene in stark, brutal detail. The coastline was a jagged line of dark land to our right, and the convoy was moving parallel to it, a string of pearls for us to sever. As we dropped, the first puffs of black smoke appeared in the sky below us, followed by the distinctive, sharp crack of flak. Then more. And more. Soon, the air ahead was a veritable wall of bursting shells, each explosion a lethal cloud of shrapnel and concussive force. The Germans had been waiting. They knew their shipping lanes were vital, and they had prepared a reception committee. Flak barrage intensifying. Hold steady, bombardier. Miller grunted, fighting the controls, as the B-29 bucked and swayed from the near misses. The noise was deafening now, the constant thudding and rattling of the aircraft compounding the roar of the engines and the explosions outside. It felt like we were flying through a monstrous hailstorm, but with each hailstone capable of tearing us apart. I have the lead merchantman in my sights, I yelled back, my eyes glued to the Norden bomb sight, the crosshairs dancing maddeningly as the plane was buffeted. My hands, despite the cold metal, felt sweaty. This was the moment. All the training, all the risks, all the sacrifices led to this. The fate of the mission, and potentially the war in this sector, rested on these next few moments. The convoy was a mix of large freighters, probably laden with vital strategic materials, and smaller, faster destroyers or torpedo boats, their guns already blazing. We targeted the largest vessel first, a deep-hold cargo ship, its decks piled high with what looked like crates and vehicles. It was moving at a respectable clip, but nothing could outrun a B-29 in a bombing run, provided we could get close enough and hold steady enough to deliver our payload. Bomb doors opening, I announced, feeling the familiar shudder as the massive doors beneath the fuselage began to retract. The wind rushed in, a sudden, cold blast, carrying with it the smell of the sea and the metallic tang of battle. Steady, steady, almost there. My thumb hovered over the release button, my heart hammering against my ribs. The crosshair settled, just for a moment, on the ship's midsection. I compensated for its speed, for the wind, for the B-29's own forward momentum. It was a calculation, an instinct, a prayer. Bombs away! I shouted, pressing the button. The B-29 lurched upward with a sudden, noticeable lightness as the heavy ordnance dropped free, tumbling towards the gray waves below. I immediately pulled my head away from the bomb site, straining to see the impact. A moment of agonizing silence, broken only by the incessant flak. Then, a titanic geyser of water erupted alongside the ship, followed by a secondary, more sinister explosion as one of our bombs found its mark, piercing the deck and detonating deep within its hold. A massive fireball bloomed, quickly followed by a thick column of black smoke that billowed skyward, obscuring the stricken vessel.
Direct hit! She's burning!
I screamed, a raw, primal cry of triumph mixed with relief.
Good hit, Bombardier! Pulling up! Coming around for another run!
Miller yelled, already banking the B-29 hard, throwing us against our harnesses. The maneuver was designed to take us out of the immediate flak zone and set us up for another pass, or to target another ship. The air was still thick with explosions, the tracers still crisscrossing, but we had scored a victory. 1 down. At least 17 more to go. The enormity of the task weighed heavily, but the taste of success, however brief, fueled our resolve. As we circled, I could see other B-29s in our formation already engaged, their bomb doors open, their own payloads arcing towards other targets in the convoy. Explosions rippled across the water, some near misses, others finding their marks with devastating effect. The Germans, however, were not passive targets. Their escorts were maneuvering aggressively, laying down smoke screens and attempting to put themselves between us and their merchantmen. Anti-aircraft fire from the ships intensified, a desperate, last-ditch effort to repel the aerial giants that had descended upon them.
Left inner engine temp still critical. Cap! We're losing oil pressure.
Davies' voice sliced through the cockpit noise, urgency now replacing his earlier calm.
She won't take much more of this.
My heart sank. The B-29's Achilles heel. We pushed her too hard, too fast, too low. The constant stress, the evasive maneuvers, the sustained power output, it was all compounding the inherent design flaw of those temperamental engines. We had struck a blow, but the cost was mounting, and the day was far from over. We still had so many targets, so many ships to sink, and our own aircraft was beginning to falter, threatening to turn our triumph into another tragic statistic. The question was not if the engine would fail, but when, and whether we could accomplish our impossible mission before it did. The gray sea stretched out below, dotted with the black plumes of our initial successes, but also with the ever-present threat of more flak, more fighters, and the internal struggle to keep our wounded bird in the air. The gray sea stretched out below, dotted with the black plumes of our initial successes, but also with the ever-present threat of more flak, more fighters, and the internal struggle to keep our wounded bird in the air.
Feathering left inner. Can't hold the temperature. Cap! It's going to seize.
Sergeant Davies' voice was a strained shout over the intercom, cutting through the din of battle. The dreaded moment had arrived. The R-3350, our temperamental beast, was giving up.
Damn it, Davies! Do it!
Miller roared back, wrestling the controls. The B-29 shuddered violently as the propeller on the inner left engine slowly feathered, its blades turning edge-on to the wind, ceasing to spin. The roar of 3 engines, though still immense, suddenly felt lopsided, the loss of power immediately noticeable. The aircraft began to yaw slightly, pulling to the left, and Miller had to apply heavy rudder to compensate. Our airspeed dropped, making us even more vulnerable.
We're losing altitude. Cap! Can't maintain this speed on 3 engines with this load?
Peterson, our navigator, pointed out, his voice laced with concern.
We haven't finished the run yet.
I yelled, my eyes still scanning for targets.
There's another freighter, dead ahead. Large one.
Miller didn't hesitate.
Hold her steady, Bombardier. Davies, keep an eye on the other 3. Peterson, give me every nut you can find in this beast. Jenkins, keep those gunners alert.
The sheer audacity of continuing the attack with a dead engine, under heavy flak, was madness, but it was the kind of madness that won wars. My hands flew over the bombsight controls, adjusting for our slower speed, for the slight list of the aircraft. The flak was still relentless, black bursts blossoming all around us, but now, with our reduced speed, we were even more exposed. I saw a flash of red from our right waist gunner, a stream of tracers stitching towards a German destroyer that was spitting fire at us.
"Bombs away!"
I shouted, pressing the button again. The B-29 lurched, lighter by another ton of high explosives. This time, I saw the bombs fall true, a perfect string impacting squarely on the freighter's deck. A secondary explosion ripped through its hull, sending debris high into the air. The ship buckled, its back breaking almost instantly, and it began to settle quickly into the churning gray water.
"Another one down!"
Miller yelled, a grim satisfaction in his voice.
"All right, Bombardier, what's next?"
We continued our desperate dance, weaving through the flak, our remaining engines screaming in protest. My crewmates, battered and exhausted, worked like a finely tuned machine. Davies coaxed every bit of power from the remaining 3 engines, his eyes glued to the gauges. Peterson, despite his flickering navigation systems, guided us with uncanny precision, using whatever visual landmarks he could discern through the smoke and haze. Jenkins and the other gunners kept the enemy escorts at bay, their .50 caliber rounds punching holes in the attacking boats and forcing them to keep their distance. Our B-29, the supposed failure, was proving its mettle in the most brutal way imaginable. It groaned, it shuddered, it bled oil and hydraulic fluid, but it kept flying. We made pass after pass, targeting merchantmen, troop transports, and even a smaller coastal patrol vessel that dared to challenge us. Each time, the B-29 absorbed more punishment, but each time, we delivered a devastating blow. The sky was growing darker, not just with the approach of evening, but with the thick, oily smoke from burning and sinking ships. The convoy, once a formidable line, was now a scattered wreck, a testament to the concentrated fury of our squadron. We were running low on bombs, but the other B-29s, those that had made it through the initial fighter attacks and the flak barges, were also making their presence felt. Explosions rocked the water in every direction. The sheer scale of destruction was almost unbelievable. Finally, Miller pulled us up, away from the chaos below.
"Bombardier, what's our tally?"
"How many?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue. I squinted through the bomb sight, trying to count the plumes of smoke, the sinking hulls. It was hard to be precise in the fading light and the general pandemonium.
At least 6, Captain. Maybe 7 direct hits from us. And I saw at least 10 more from the others."
A collective cheer, weak but heartfelt, went up over the intercom. 17 or 18. The number was almost incomprehensible. We had done it. We had achieved the impossible.
"All right, gentlemen,"
Miller announced, his voice now tinged with relief.
"Mission accomplished. Now, let's get this wounded bird home."
The journey back was even more harrowing than the attack itself. Our 3 remaining engines, pushed beyond their limits, sputtered and coughed. The feathered engine, now a dead weight, created constant drag. Peterson wrestled with his failing navigation equipment, relying heavily on celestial navigation and dead reckoning, constantly cross-referencing with our pre-planned routes. The electrical damage meant some of our instruments were unreliable, and the cabin pressure system was barely holding. We were losing precious altitude, slowly but surely, over the vast, unforgiving expanse of the North Sea. The cold seeped into the cabin as the pressure dropped, and fatigue, heavy and suffocating, began to set in. Every creak and groan of the airframe, every fluctuation in engine RPM, sent a jolt of fear through us. There was no more flak, no more fighters, but the enemy within, the failing mechanics of our own aircraft, was a far more insidious threat. We knew that if we ditched in the icy waters, our chances of survival were slim to none. Davies, hunched over his panel, was a grim sentinel, constantly adjusting fuel mixtures, monitoring temperatures, willing the engines to keep turning.
"Holding steady, Cap,"
He'd report every now and then, his voice now a strained whisper.
"but she's thirsty. Real thirsty."
Hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. The sun had long since set, plunging the world into a moonless, stardusted blackness. We navigated by the faint glow of our instruments and the distant glimmer of stars, our B-29 alone, limping giant against the vast canvas of the night. Hope was a fragile thing, constantly battling against the omnipresent dread of mechanical failure. Then, Peterson's voice, suddenly clear and strong, cut through the silence.
"Light ahead. Dead on course, Captain. I think it's the airfield."
A collective sigh of relief, almost a moan, filled the cabin. Miller peered through the windscreen, his eyes straining. And there it was, a faint, flickering beacon in the distance, a promise of safety, of home. The sight was like a shot of adrenaline, chasing away the fatigue, replacing it with a surge of desperate hope.
"Prepare for landing,"
Miller commanded, his voice regaining its usual authority.
"Davies, watch those engines like a hawk. Peterson, talk me down."
The landing was a masterclass in skill and sheer nerve. With one engine out, and the others barely holding, Miller brought the wounded Superfortress in, touching down with a bump and a squeal of tires that felt like the sweetest sound in the world. We rolled down the hastily lit runway, the aircraft listing slightly, finally coming to a halt amidst a flurry of flashing lights and cheering ground crew. As we climbed out of the mangled, battle-scarred B-29, the cold night air hit us, but it felt invigorating. The ground crew swarmed around the aircraft, their faces a mixture of awe and shock at the damage. The left inner engine was indeed seized, its propeller frozen in place. Bullet holes riddled the fuselage, patched crudely with whatever was available. The smell of burnt oil and cordite still clung to the air. We were alive. Every man. The debriefing was short, intense, and shrouded in secrecy. The intelligence officers were almost beside themselves. Reports from our entire squadron were coming in, confirming the unbelievable. 18 German ships sunk in a single day. Merchantmen, troop transports, even a few smaller naval escorts. The German coastal shipping lanes had been decimated, their logistics thrown into utter chaos. It was a crippling blow, one that would resonate for weeks, if not months, along the European front. And the B-29. The
failure.
The money pit, the maintenance nightmare, the temperamental beast. On that single, brutal day, it had rewritten its own legacy. It had proved, in the most emphatic and destructive way possible, that its potential was not just theoretical, but terrifyingly real. It wasn't just a bomber. It was a weapon of unparalleled strategic power, capable of altering the course of battle with a single, audacious strike. We, the crew, were just a small part of that. We were the men who had coaxed the beast, wrestled with its flaws, and unleashed its fury. We had faced death, stared it down, and emerged victorious, not just against the enemy, but against the very doubts that had plagued our magnificent aircraft. The B-29 Superfortress, once whispered about as a folly, had, on that one day, silenced its critics and etched its name into the annals of history, a testament to the ingenuity of its designers and the incredible courage of the men who flew it into hell. And as I walked away from our battered bird that night, the roar of its engine still echoing in my ears, I knew that I had been part of something truly extraordinary, something that defied all expectations and proved that even a perceived failure could, in the right hands and under the right circumstances, achieve the impossible.